Yeah, I'm just wondering if there is a way to select a certain screen. Worst case, I'm gonna remove one and let us see. Is this relatively better or just about the same?
Yeah, now better.
Okay, let us see that. So which screen are you guys seeing?
With Salesforce bulk API.
Okay, so we are on the presentation alone, right? Okay. All right, so hello everyone. Good evening. My name is Amresh. I work as an integration architect at Capgemini. I have been working on the MuleSoft specifically for the last 6 years, and for the last few months, I would say, I had the opportunity to explore deeply on the Salesforce bulk APIs and specifically the ETL application of the Salesforce components or Salesforce connectors. So in that sense, I had the opportunity to really dig deep behind the connectors and go into the bulk APIs of Salesforce and see how they are leveraged into the actual connector and the actual use case itself. So in this session, we'll go into these agenda items. We'll try to see what are the ETL use cases in the context of Salesforce. And how Salesforce APIs kind of give, or enable this ETL capabilities. And after that, we'll particularly dig deeper into the bulk API V1 and V2 connectors. So there are two versions to this Salesforce APIs, specifically in the bulk side of things. There are limitations to each of them, one more than other, but we'll try to dig deep into that as well. There are limitations and tuning possibilities associated with those as well. So we'll go through those numbers, features, what's plus, what's minus, and we'll go through a small demo to see how it all comes together. All right. So just for fun, when this opportunity came to me, and as I was trying to explore or trying to understand, the initial problem statement came as a company has a MuleSoft license and it claims that it has the ETL capability. And at the same time, there are competitors, the hardcore ETL folks, applications like Ab Initio, Informatica, a lot of those things. So we were trying to compete with them in this particular use case. And as I was trying to explore MuleSoft, I can't help but particularly notice this picture coming out. I had the same thing, like, should I go for an SUV versus should I go for a pickup truck, which is strong and all, it's fully capable. At the end of the day, it really depends on what each person's needs are. So I'm not saying that ETL, MuleSoft can completely take over ETL tools like Informatica or Ab Initio or any of those. There are some pleasant, there are places where we are good. There are some places where the hardcore ETL tools are good. So for example, if you look at a pickup truck, it's specialized for hauling heavy things, a lot of things. Whereas an SUV, compared to a car, compared to a regular passenger car, it's it's much more versatile, right? But it's not as heavy hauling as a pickup truck, but it is good enough and can do a lot of things for a family, or it's more getting popular these days as well. And if you look at the pickup truck, it does cost more, and it does cost more for gas as well, right? But when you see a small SUV or a crossover, it's probably a little more than a car, but it's still within the budget. That's one of the great things about the SUV. Again, it really depends. Are you a construction worker who wants to have everything, and you like to go out wild, out into the wild and take bikes and all that, versus you want to do your own stuff, DIY stuff for your home, things like that. It depends. Each vehicle has a certain use case, right? And when you drive a big truck, you need special skills compared to driving a small car as well, right? And not to mention the wider parking lot and parking space that are needed for that. So as I was comparing the MuleSoft versus Informatica, for which we were actually engaged, so I couldn't help but notice that we are basically, the MuleSoft versus ETL tools is basically similar. Now, MuleSoft ETL tools, basically when I speak about ETL, I'm particularly talking about the batch capabilities and how the batch capability is used in context of an ETL. That versus a hardcore ETL and the behind the scene approaches of how they are very much different in a lot of ways. And depending on where you are, the expenses that you need, the skill set you need, we can choose one versus another. Okay, there is no right or wrong. It all depends on what is the use case and what really works for the customer. Now, in particularly coming to the Salesforce, I'm assuming that most of the people in MuleSoft have been in Salesforce or have at least interfaced with their Salesforce in there. And I also understand there may be some people who did not. I, as a MuleSoft developer, did not look at Salesforce until the first 2 years of my MuleSoft career. So just to give a brief intro to what Salesforce is. Salesforce is a customer relationship management software as a service platform, which basically handles A to Z of anything related to customer management. Like if you are a big a bank with who wants to deal with the incoming customers for home lending, or if you are if you are a trucking company which wants to keep in touch with its drivers, things like that. And it is completely cloud-based, and it's basically an online database of all the business objects associated in the context of CRM. Now, to name a few, a contact, the picture that you're seeing on the screen, the contact, account, opportunity, an activity or a campaign or a lead. So these are some of the different objects for which we interact with Salesforce. A lead is someone who can become an account. An opportunity is also something that can become an account, can attract more leads, and once an account comes, an account has a contact, things like that. So all these are individual objects, and each of these objects are use cases for ETL. So you want to have, let me go a little bit further. So when we come into the use cases, right, ETL as such is a very, take any system to any system at a very much higher scale. It is more, it has been there specifically for cases where you need BI data from all the applications in your enterprise and want to take business intelligence-based decisions or business decisions on those things. You need to have quick reference of all the snapshots of the data coming into it's something like a data lake, and from there BI tools can act and try to find out a relevant choice for the business to make, right? Something on the next level or a lower level is comes a need for syncing or having two systems within an enterprise or an external enterprise or be in sync together. Now, when I say that, this can be staging database tables where an application just dumps all the information or the daily transactions into a table instead of right away going and starting uploading to Salesforce. An application may be doing its job, but it has a need or a necessity or a responsibility to pass it on to Salesforce or any other application for that matter. And similarly, legacy apps may be receiving all the base customer level data from end systems, right? Like from mainframes and databases in mainframes. Maybe in the enterprise for quite a long time, for purposes of maintaining customer information, or in terms of healthcare, if you look at it in terms of maintaining the membership information, things like that, right? And it's not just these applications, but even Salesforce internally has different orgs within an enterprise. If an enterprise is big enough, they can have individual Salesforce orgs, and those orgs also want to interface with each other and keep in sync for a certain subset of use cases, a certain subset of objects. Now, the protocols through which they can communicate, it can be SQL, files, APIs. When it comes to ETL, it might be as well as a disk dump, and things like that. And where you can have a full load or a daily change, or something called delta loads, or as simple as syncing, data syncing, like whenever there is a change, you can get that change in. So what operations are basically possible in context of Salesforce, right? So at high level, what we usually call for any data source or data CRUD, right? Create, read, update, delete. The same way, insert, upsert, delete, or just query. In context of Salesforce and the APIs that they have, they usually categorize the insert, upsert, or there is something called update as well, and delete as something called inject operation. I'll come to that in a short while. And query is basically the reading of it. That's the second category. So these are some of the use cases that where MuleSoft can come in and help teams, because MuleSoft is already having the connections with these applications in an API, in an enterprise ESP or landscape. So that is something where MuleSoft can readily help instead of having to set up some hardcore. I mean, when you look at actual ETL implementations, you will have a proper one-to-one connectivity between the two systems being integrated, and a little bit of tight coupling will also be there. So that is where MuleSoft can come in and help. Now, coming to the Salesforce platform APIs as such. Now, what are platform APIs? So these are the ways to integrate with Salesforce. If you want to interface and read or update or whatnot, the CRUD operations with Salesforce, these are the different types of APIs. There are SOAP APIs, REST APIs, streaming APIs, Apex APIs. But particularly for our ETL use cases, we have something called the bulk APIs. So bulk API is nothing but basically a specialized RESTful API for larger data loads, typically 2000. And there are debates. There are different versions of Salesforce documentation pointing that sometimes you can have 2000. It's preferable to have at minimum of 2000 or even 50,000. So there are various factors in arriving at that decision, because there is something called limits in a Salesforce organizations to how many of these APIs can be used, or the volume or the capacity of these APIs, because Salesforce is basically a cloud-based service, and it is a shared platform. And when I say shared, it within the organization, multiple applications, multiple teams, or multiple business groups may be using the same Salesforce organization and sharing these API capabilities. So in that sense, which there may be some things that really need to be considered when taking such decision. So what's so special about bulk APIs, right? So bulk APIs usually carry huge loads Now, on a RESTful API, that's not a good thing, but you have to look at it in a little differently, because bulk APIs are basically asynchronous in nature. What that necessarily means is you have the data that you want to upload into Salesforce. You don't necessarily hand it over to Salesforce and wait for it. You just hand it over to Salesforce in either one or multiple requests in a chunked fashion. You let Salesforce do its job in the backend, completely managed by Salesforce, or there is some control at your side if you need. And Salesforce will come back to us saying that, okay, this I'm done. This is the result, right? So in that way, it is asynchronous, and that's what makes it more powerful than any of the other APIs in terms of ETL capabilities. As I said, behind the scenes, Salesforce does batching, chunking, all the necessary parallelism needed for getting the best possible performance. Now, there are two versions, I was saying, V1 bulk APIs and V2 bulk APIs. Now, Salesforce, I think every summer and winter of every year, similar to our Apples and Samsungs, they kind of release newer versions of their APIs. When I say newer versions, it's not necessarily the V1 and V2 as such, but within V1, there are minor releases that keep happening, and they keep on adding changes. Right. So in such way, V1 versus V2 is the major change in the way Salesforce accepts these data and processes these data. So there is it is considered that V2 is better than V1 in terms of many ways, but there are some handful set of cases which I have found that when particularly using MuleSoft, V1 still gives us that control if we think that we cannot do it. Again, it's not necessarily to do with the Salesforce itself. It's more to do with the anypoint connector that's associated with it. Maybe anypoint connectors, for that matter, also do come with versions matching to the versions that are released by the Salesforce in the backend. Basically, MuleSoft connectors or MuleSoft Salesforce connectors and their operations in the backend are interacting with these APIs. Right. In that sense, if you quickly go to the okay. So if you see this, right, so these are the operators that we usually see in an Anypoint Studio project or in a MuleSoft Mule palette, right? We have about jobs, bulk API V2s, batch info. So if you particularly look at the batch or the bulk, those are what constitute the bulk APIs, right? All these internally behind the scenes are interfacing with these APIs, so to speak. And whenever there are upgrades to those APIs, these connectors also will get a subsequent or consequent upgrade. Right now, Salesforce is in 53 version of the bulk API V2, and each version has end of life cycle as well. Similarly, our MuleSoft connectors for these Salesforce also have a similar release versions and a life cycle associated with it. When I say it's life cycle, the minimum supported Mule runtime is what determines the life cycle of it, right? So now coming back, we'll quickly go through what's the anatomy of a bulk API processing, right? The bulk API basically operates under this construct. You have a bulk or maybe a few million records with maybe, let's say, 10 or 20 fields each field with maybe 10 bytes, right? So these records have to be processed in parallel and loaded into Salesforce. Now, these records, how it happens is you can look at it in two ways, either top down or bottom up. right? So if you look at from bottom up, records are there. These records, when they're supposed to be processed by Salesforce, we have to, or Salesforce itself, depending on the version, handles them in different batches for parallelism. And all these batches are coordinated by job, right? It kind of sounds similar to your AutoSource or any of those scheduling frameworks, but basically the job, if you look at it from a top down, job is a trackable job, a one-time request to Salesforce with a set of batches, with each batch containing multiple records, and these batches process in parallel. And once you're done, based on whether once Salesforce is done with the processing asynchronously, Salesforce makes the job and the status of the batches and the status of the records available on demand via a different set of APIs again, API endpoints, so to speak. So if it is a query job, you just say, hey, I want select star from select names from all the accounts, right? There may be 50 million, 5 million or 50 million based on the use case. There can be multiple such things. So you don't necessarily expect that as soon as you fire the request, you don't necessarily need to get the response with all those 5 million or even PageNation in that sense. What you do is you make a call to Salesforce saying that, hey, I need this query as a so-called SOQL, Salesforce object query language. So when you give that query, Salesforce takes that query and processes it in the background, makes the result sets ready in a separate data store, and makes them available as API responses whenever at whatever flexibility that the client can access them. What this means is you make a call to Salesforce with a certain query. The query comes back with a response saying that it's successfully accepted, and after that Salesforce goes back and does its job and comes back saying not comes back, but you can come back after some time checking the status. Hey, is the job done? If it is done, can you give me how many are there, how many results are there? Okay, there are a lot of results. Then let me chunk them at based on my capacity. So Salesforce gives APIs for each and every individual statements that I just mentioned. Now, comparing the bulk API 2.0 versus bulk API, again, as I was said, if you see the ingest availability, query availability, the authentication, ingest data format, all these are different features between the two APIs, right? And the 41.0 is basically the same thing as the version that I was mentioning earlier. So these APIs keep evolving and keep adding new features to their feature list. And the ingest availability, nothing but basically insert, upsert, delete capabilities. Those came in from the 41, whereas in bulk API they have been since the 16. Bulk API is basically what we call as version 1, and bulk API 2.0 is what you call as version 2. Right, and you'll see the same thing when you go into the AnyPoint Mule palette and start typing Salesforce. You'll see some things with bulk, or say simply without any version, and then you'll start seeing some connectors or some operations with V2. That's basically what this is. Now, authentication wise, bulk API does support OAuth 2.0. Whereas the bulk API 2.0 supports OAuth 2.0, whereas the bulk doesn't. The ingest availability of bulk API is only CSV. Again, this is where I was saying there are some limitations to bulk API 2.0. Well, that it's not necessarily a limitation. It depends on who is looking at it. CSV makes it much shorter in terms of the content of the payload, and hence they're stuck with the CSV. Whereas if you look at JSON and XML, well, it is convenient for the client to pass whatever it is, but still, if you look at it from a Salesforce standpoint, and if you look at the reports generated by bulk APIs, you will see the amount of data that is passed down to bulk API when you have these different formats. XML carries the heaviest when you pass on this information. So large file batch processing. So this is where the core difference between bulk API 2.0 and bulk API is. Now, bulk API is something like, you as a client who is calling Salesforce get to decide what are the number of records, how many batches do I need to have, and how many does each batch can have. Right, that is something that is there in bulk API. But whereas in bulk API 2.0, you can create a job, you can continue to give as many records or as much amount of data as needed, and then once you're done, you can tell to Salesforce that, hey, I'm done. Again, when I'm talking all these things, it's basically post and kind of patch kind of in endpoints that against a certain job. So Salesforce internally goes and decides based on the availability of the resources, availability of their cloud at that point of time, what is the best possible chunking, what is the best possible multi-threading needed, and it takes the decision to process parallelly. In that sense, bulk API 2.0, when given with heavier loads, turns to be faster, because it's and the amount of timeouts for each batch and for records turns to be much less. Again, it's not without faults, it's not completely fail-proof. That is where I see that Salesforce will continue to improve even in future. And our MuleSoft MuleForce auto-tuning facilities kind of seem to be inspired by the same feature as I was just saying. There are some other things. I will go through them when we actually go into the down, a little bit lower levels. Now, this is what I was talking about when I'm talking in terms of the comparison between and how things are done. Now, on the left is a sample query, Salesforce query job, versus on the right is a version 2 of the same query job. Now, if you see, the create query job is where we will submit a query saying that, hey, I want so-and-so query to be executed. And then you have to tell how to chunk them, how to batch them in queries. And Salesforce will take that batching instruction and process it, and then also will give the result set as you decided. It is up to us to iterate through those batches that we decided. Now, we as a client may not know the exact state of Salesforce, and we may give incorrect values, right? Incorrect configuration or incorrect division of batches. Whereas on the right side, bulk V2, this is where we just tell, okay, this is the operation that I want. Can you just get me the results? Salesforce will now go into the backend, do its job, tuning itself, and retrieves the result set in one place. And you get an endpoint saying that, okay, seems like there are X number of records. I can do all versus I can do one at a time or a few at a time using pagination. So the complexity of the way we code also gets reduced much more for the coding or for the processing performance-wise. V2 does get better. Let's see. So we'll quickly deep dive into the API a little bit more, or its life cycle, basically. Now, this is the diagram that you see here is a bulk API V2 lifecycle. So you start with opening a job. Basically, opening a job means it's basically a simple API call to Salesforce saying that, hey, I'm planning to start something with you, particularly on this object, let's say account object. I want to insert some records, and I'm going to do it in a certain format. JSON, CSV, or whatnot. So in case of V2, I'm gonna do it as a CSV. That's by default, because it in Salesforce use, it is the most efficient in terms of how much bytes it occupies for data, right? Once you open it, you can go on putting more records to it at your own speed and pace as a client. And once you are done, you can tell to Salesforce that, okay, I am done. This is all the data that I can. Again, when I say that, you can do it in either one single API call or multiple such calls based on what is your kind of client's memory capacities, processing capacities, things like that. Right. Once that is upload state complete is conveyed to Salesforce, Salesforce will now move on to the actual processing, and it in the job state will move to in progress. And once the job state is in progress, and we let Salesforce do whatever it is doing, it's in an automated way. After some time, there are three possible outcomes to this. Either the job is 100% successfully complete, or the job is failed to some extent or completely failed. Or we as a client can choose to reject the job because we don't want additional damage. Maybe we observed something in the reports, right? I'll stop there, and there are some limits that I want to go next, which I'll probably go with a demo and then come back to the limits. That's the last part. Any questions before I go on to a demo? Subhash, I can't see the chat window. Do we have any questions, Subhash?
Sorry. So I think Dharma asked, does upset and update are the same? So no, right? Upset.
I don't think so. They are probably different. I haven't personally had the chance to research update personally, but upsert is basically if you have a certain record and if you know the ID of that record, then you have to use that as an external ID as a correlating factor and then upsert it. Update.
Which will have both, right? Update and insert. Upset is nothing, but whereas update is.
Yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. Upsert can do the insert, and even if there are no records, you can insert. Yeah, okay.
There was another question from Puneet. I am not sure which is related to your topic, but he was asking, is the async communication achieved with webhooks?
Well, webhook basically comes where the service provider comes back to the client to make a call, right? In this particular bulk API case, it doesn't. It is the client's responsibility to go into the service provider again and check whether it's done or not done at a reasonable interval or whatever is the reasonable logic.
Okay. I think to answer Puneet's question. Puneet, if you have any more question on the same, then you can put it in the chat. Yeah. So let's quickly wrap the demo because we have another session.
Yeah. Okay, let me see. Can you see my AnyPoint Studio?
Not yet. Still, we are seeing the presentation.
Sure.
Okay, maybe I'll just end the show. And is this visible now?
No, still the presentation.
Okay. Okay, let me try sharing one more time. Okay, can you guys see this Anypoint Studio now?
You can see now.
Yeah, okay. So just to explain the bulk API V1 versus V2, and particularly in the ingest section of things, I have created two flows for a quick look. These are I mean, it's a much toned down version of an ETL job. It's not going to run a few minutes or hours because the account or the Salesforce account that it is operating behind on top of is basically a developer account. Let me open that. So this is the developer account, and it has a certain 5 megabyte restriction. So we're going to deal with a relatively much less volume, like 7 records with 3 fields or 5 fields at most. All right, so that's one thing to see here. So the object that I'm going to now deal with is going to be the accounts object, right? So if you see here, basically Salesforce and like as maybe a salesperson or someone like using Salesforce actually as a end user usually has these accounts in his screen. Now these can be fed from either by him or coming into the Salesforce from different systems or different processes, right? And our ETL can be one of the process, right? In that sense, what I have here is a replication. I did not really focus on what source it is coming from. I am just going to trigger it as if an API is coming to MuleSoft from a different system. But this can be as simple as a file coming in, or MuleSoft itself is going into a specific database that it has connection to and extracting those and loading them into Salesforce, right? So everything here is Salesforce being a target, or Salesforce getting the request. So I have shown two approaches, one looking consistently big, the second relatively just a simple straight line, right? I'll quickly go through the difference here. Now the second more leaner flow is the version 2, whereas the version 1 is using the batch flow. Again, there is a reason that I created a batch job in this sense. Particularly, I'll tell the difference right now. So if you want, right now, for whatever reason, maybe MuleSoft is yet to provide a better upgrade to this feature. So Salesforce has certain limitations on how many calls can be made within the organization with all the users under the organization. And there are certain limitations that I'll come to after this demo is done, which will limit the number of calls that you can make in a 24-hour period, right? In that sense, now if you're dealing with a really large load, you would rather be done with the least number of calls rather than more number of calls to Salesforce, right? In that sense, I found that the version 1 still has some capability in that sense. When I say version 1, it's not something to blame Salesforce, but Salesforce APIs do provide both in both the versions. But for some reason, the MuleSoft connector in version 2 seems to be allowing only one per job, right? One call for one job. What I mean by that is, if I open this version 2 connector configuration, you'll see that all it has is an account. What is the type of object that I want to update or insert? What is the payload? What are the records that I need to upload, and what kind of operations do I need to do? Right, and basically telling some more things about what's the delimiter in the payload that recognizes individual records. And if you are doing an upset, you can have something called external ID field name that can tell what is the correlating factor. All right. So when it comes to the batch, you can do this in a completely different way. You can call you can call multiple jobs for the same job ID. Okay, you create one job, which is basically saying I want to insert a set of accounts in the content type of JSON. Right, this is version 1, and you can continue to load as many as possible into that job as batches, but you have to tell it how many do need to come. Now, in that sense, that this batch capability can continuously keep on adding multiple batches to the same job, thus keeping the number of job limit, number of jobs that can be processed to a minimum. Whereas in bulk API, if you keep on calling the bulk API to multiple times, similar to how you're doing here, it will keep on creating multiple jobs. That's what I observed. But Salesforce, the APIs themselves, they don't have that feature. They give both the phases as separate endpoints, but for some reason the connector still has it. Maybe we'll see an upgrade in the future. In version 1, the lifecycle wise, you have to go through creating a job. It's basically just a placeholder saying that, hey, I want to initiate something, and then you have to create a batch under which you have to actually deliver the content. And then once you are done delivering the content, you have to close the job saying that I am done uploading. And once you close the job, you can expect some delay, like you can wait for it for some time, and then you can go and find what happened to the job. Right, that's what I'm getting done here. Now there are a couple of factors to note here. The block size in batch terminology, if you guys have gotten the chance to work on batch flows, blocks are something that kind of determine what are the number of records that can be processed at a time, right? Like if you have 2, it means blocks of 2 can be processed parallelly within the batch scope. Similarly, in batch aggregator, what the aggregator size kind of tells what's inside it can aggregate at one and fire at once, right? So because of the memory restrictions, I have chosen 2 and 4 for a set of 7 records. What that means is I will be processing chunks of 2 and aggregating in 4 records at a time and firing to Salesforce at one go, thus creating 2 batches for Salesforce, right? That's what it means. And now you can extrapolate this for a few million records. And this tuning is what I was telling that version 1 offers. And if you know what you're doing, this is a great thing. But if not, it can be a problem and you can easily lose out. The second one is basically a listener just for triggering something, and we'll read some data from a file and we pass that data to Salesforce bulk API, and Salesforce itself determines how many chunks to make it, and processing wise how fast it can do. And assuming that you have to wait some time, and then you go and get the status and get the result. So I'm going to quickly do a run first with the version 1 and next with the version 2. Okay, so this is just a trigger, but where I'm going with that is I'll show you the file content. So what I have here is basically a set of account objects, very lean, not so great amount of data, because in developer account we just have 5 megabytes of storage in the Salesforce developer account, and I cannot afford to lose on multiple runs. So what I have is basically set of accounts with the description, like how many employees they have, a CSV file, so to say, and okay. So I think I have to shift one more. Okay. In terms of version 1, what I'm using is the same version of that CSV file. I'm putting that into a JSON as an input, just to replicate a different type of source. Right? It has the same data, but in a different format. It has 7 records, 21 to 27, and we'll be running this. So when I fire this, oh, sorry, I almost forgot to fire it up. All right. Okay, so something happened. So if you are aware of the batch processing, what happens is you have 7 records that are loaded into the persistent queue in Mule, and it has fired 2 instances. It's a little hard to read in here, but I'll quickly show what I'm talking about. So basically, all 7 records have been successfully loaded. You see here, total records processed 7. I'll show what that means. Now, if you come here and if you start looking, you'll see all those 7 accounts coming up here. Not much data here because of the way it is. And if you go into it, those 3 fields that I was talking about somewhere here. So if you see the account name, description, and the number of employees, right? You can put more fields as you need. So what actually happened here is, so if you go into the setup screen, there is something called environments, and under the environments, there is a monitoring page called, this is the Salesforce page, by the way, a monitoring link called bulk data load jobs. And in here, there are a set of jobs that have run. This is the one that this V2 that you see here, that is the one that has just run. Let me see. I doubt if that is the one, but anyway. So if you see here, this, hold on, sorry, I'm not looking at the right one. This one, the version 1. Now, if you look at version 1, as I was said, I have decided to go with 2 batches. So this is the job, and I've created 2 batches with 7, for the 7 records, one with 4 and one with 3. So the control is driven by the batch modules, batch scopes process, right? If you look at it, what I have triggered is basically chunked request. Test account 1, test account 3, test account 7, test account 5, 4 here, and 3 here. Right, and all of them are loaded successfully. So this is the times that I've taken: 103 milliseconds, 84 milliseconds. And again, these are pretty, you can't really gauge from this, but these are good enough for the numbers. Now let me quickly go to the bulk API v2 and see how that works. Right, I've put an intentional delay to even cover. So if you see here, this has come back with a certain state saying that the job is complete. It has gone through the V2 ingest process. It has inserted the data, and this is the ID created. Now coming back here, you see there are a few more added here. So count with the different, again, these are not, I did not put any unique identifying factors for it to reject or anything. So I just had the same data in both ways so that they can get created without any hassle. So if you see the test, there are two test accounts, one from bulk and one from V2 and one from V1. Now the second one also has the same thing, but the employee is different, right? So like that. Now what happened here is, if you see here, after we processed the V1, we saw another one that came in for V2, and that also processed 7 records. Now if I go in, you'll see that there are 2 batches, but usually what happens is it is not driven by me. Salesforce has determined that 1 batch is sufficient to put all of them together, and has finished, right? And the total was 85 milliseconds. When you look at this 85 seconds versus the time here, it is same for the same batch, but what happened here is we have occupied few more milliseconds from the Salesforce cloud workers, right? So in that sense, we are unnecessarily wasting real estate, so to speak, right? The time wise it's taking the same or a little bit over. So that's the difference. Now imagine this being few hundred batches and each one at max having 10,000 records, because that's the limit. I'll quickly go through the limits, but that's basically the difference of bulk API V2 versus V1. Now it's much leaner compared to the other thing, like 3 steps versus 1 step, right? You create the job as well as pass the data in 1 step. In that way, it is good. The data amount of data that you can pass in that HTTP call is also much more, 100 megabytes, which is considerably high for an API. But that's the limit, and you can get all these things. So there are better things. There are some conscious decisions made by Salesforce, it seems, on how they chose to implement the V2. Okay. Let me come back to any questions on the demo itself.
Amresh, because your session extended for extra time, right? So we want to skip the
Sure. Yeah.
review session, so you can continue. We can ask some questions and then later we can close the event for today. But we can have Dataweave deep dive in next session. Aravind can
Sure.
present in next session. Yeah. So any
Yeah.
questions? You can type your. Yeah, I think some questions somebody asked.
SF connector. Can you go through SF connector config?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to go through it a little bit later, Subhash? Or
No. Now you can go to, because anyway Arvind's it's not happening, right? So we can complete in next 5 minutes. Yeah, you can complete in next 5 minutes. You have seven more minutes.
okay.
Okay.
Okay. Is my Anypoint Studio clear?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll go through the bulk connector V1. Now each of these steps are basically request objects for the underlying APIs, right? When you create a job, you say what's the job, what is the object on which you want to do a job. Again, job can be only done on account, and a single operation can be done for a job, and you can tell what's the format. This is in version 1. Now, once the job is created, you can tag multiple batches with the actual payload content, right? The payload content is coming in via this batch, and it's automatically coming in and getting assigned here. Now, the operation, you tell what is the operation. It should be same as the one that you mentioned in the job. You tell what is the job ID does this batch fall under. and the content type also should match. Otherwise, it will go with the basic of XML, which will fail. And you want sometimes if you want like things to be ordered in sequence, then if you are okay with losing the performance, but if you want things to be done in sequence, you can get the concurrency mode as parallel versus sequence or serial. So that's that. And from a configurations standpoint, again, all the configurations, authorization, authentication mechanisms supported by Salesforce are mentioned here. For this example, I have used basic authorization for convenience. That we have OAuth 2.0, JWT, username, password, and SAML. Let me go back. And once you are done uploading all the different batches via this, and you can just close the job saying what's the job ID. I have extracted this job ID in the advanced here. I just took the ID coming out of that create job and put it under the job ID. And that job ID I have been using all through the process. And once I am done, I went to the job info to see, hey, what happened to the job? Now, if I look at the job, it will look something like this. Number of batches in total, number of batches in progress, and number of batches failed, number of batches completed. So if you plan to see what happened, this object structure determines. So that object structure exists for almost all. It's basically the same thing that the API determines, like as the response object. That response comes to the connectors via the data sense, right? Coming to the V2, in the V2, you don't necessarily create a job. All you do is you tell what is it that you want, what object is it that you want to do, and what operation you want to do. And the format wise, it's anyway CSV. There is no other thing, and you just pass on the payload, the whole thing at one single go, and you let it process in the background, wait for some time, and come back and look at the job state. And when you look at the job state, the output will look something like this: how much time it took, what's the concurrency mode it took, and how many records processed, how many records failed, things like that, and what's the total processing time. Any questions on the configuration?
No questions.
Okay. Puneet, how is the wait time for job cal? Do you just wait X amount of time or recheck until the... So that really depends on what's the usual trend. You can keep calling this API for job state, and it's not so much, it's not a big problem to call. It's just getting the state of it, and that kind of tells how many are failed, how many are processed, and you can keep on polling. Again, it all depends on the load that you're dealing with. You can have logics based on the load. All right. Subhash, how many more minutes do I have?
We have 2 more minutes.
Okay, I'll quit.
I think Harish asked one more question. Is there a way to set timeout if the job taking more than expected?
Well, the default timeout, maybe yes or no. I can go for the back, but by default, the individual batch has a 10-minute window. You can also put, I think you can put, let me see if I can see that. Yeah, I think for bulk API V2 you don't, but let me see if that is the same case for...
I think for V1 you can do that, right?
Yeah, in V1 we can do that. That's what I mean. V1 gives a lot more control. Yeah, I can't see it, but somewhere I do remember seeing that for the V1 as well. Probably in one of the objects. I have to see.
Let's provide the answer. Okay.
Yeah, I'll get back on that particularly.
Let's talk the significant difference between V1 and V2. Do you have anything?
Yeah. So that's where the limits comes into picture, right? Again, batch jobs that are older than 7 days in bulk API limit are gone. Jobs and terminal state are, that are older than 7 are also deleted. The length of the file name can look like what I mean by that is, I think there is in Salesforce API is one, and you can also put the actual file also load, and that name cannot go beyond 512. And a zip file can, like, you can compress the data and also send. That cannot exceed 10 megabytes for bulk API. The total unzipped cannot exceed 20 MB. But if you look at the actual bulk API 2, I think it has 150 MB. Okay, this is the numbers. So if you see 10 MB versus 150 MB, that is one thing. And in bulk API, the limits are same, 150,000, 150 million records in a 24-hour period, but they have to be under the 15,000 batches with at most of 10,000 records per batch.
Okay,
right? But in bulk API 2, it's all internally driven. Only the higher cap of the records is there, not the internal thing. But it does have the internal thing, but Salesforce kind of optimizes it.
Yeah, that's great.
Any
more questions? Anybody wants to discuss anything? Otherwise, we can quickly go to trivia and wrap up the event.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, we are really sorry, everybody. Like the current session went took long time. Reason was like multiple demos was there. So we want to cover the topic, Arvind's topic, in the next session, next meetup session. So Arvind, you want to take over? Arvind, you are talking on mute.
Go to the trivia and then let's get that going. Okay.
Okay.
All right, guys.
When you start trivia, just let me know so that I can.
Okay. So just give me 1 minute, okay?
No problem. And please ask the question numbers like 1, 2, 3, and 8 only, because the other one are out of data. Yeah.
So let me go ahead and then share my screen before I share the presentation. So is it visible, guys? Okay. So this is our first question.
1 minute. 1 minute. Let me. Okay. Anybody can answer. Yeah. I think Sridhar answered it. Anybody else?
I think Puneet came first.
Puneet. Okay. Yeah. Puneet came first. Okay. Let me write down Puneet's name.
Next question.
You can go to next session. Yeah.
I think Dharmraj Balapatabi.
Yeah. Dharma answered correct first. Yeah.
Next question.
1 minute. 1 minute. Wait for a minute. Yes. Go to next question. I think Dharma answered correctly. Can you go to the question number 8, because others are data view related questions?
Yeah. One last question, right?
Right. Yeah. I think Sridhar answered first. Yeah. Sridhar answered first. Yeah. Yeah, I think we have 3 winners, Arvind. Sridhar, Dharma, and Puneet.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'll send the email to you guys, and any more details you can contact me on my email, and also write to me and write the feedback. Can you run the last slides about the feedback and the documentation, Arvind?
Sorry.
Can you please go through the last slides after the trivia? There are a couple of slides.
Oh, sorry. I think I should be going through them. Okay, hold on. So guys, like here is some MuleSoft documentation where you can refer. There is a documentation, and then there is help center for you for whatever questions you may encounter while you are actually implementing and things like that. So that's very helpful. Apart from that, we also have we have a discussion group which is Charlotte Meetup discussions group. Feel free to join that. And networking time. I mean, ask any questions. We have 5 more minutes to wrap up. If you have any other questions, please feel free to um, and feel free to connect. And then we are always looking for presenters. If you wish to present any topic, please reach out to me or me and Subhash, and then we'll make it happen.
Yeah, I think there is a last slide. Yeah, same thing, and I think that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Yeah.